Hey, Dr. Alan Christensen here with you. And I've got a huge announcement. I was so excited to see that Time Magazine just wrote a story for millions of their readers all about resistant starch. And their wording was, and I quote, something that was insanely good for you. The studies were so strong. And it really touched me for a couple of reasons. One of which is that something useful that I've talked about for a long time that I've wanted more people to know about is getting the recognition that's due. So that was cool. The other thing I loved about it was that we're entering a good new era. For so long, health information was hard to come by. And then we've got this internet thing. And now it's easy to come by, but it's not always filtered, not always quality data that rises to the surface. But many of us have been talking about how some data is better than others and how some data is more meaningful, how you can rank all that. And that's starting to stick in. And it's starting to be the case that even the mainstream media now is learning what's real and what's helpful and what's not. And the old advice about just taking medications or just doing fad diets, that's going to start drifting out further and further. And the more tried and true, hard, good information is coming to the surface. So either you read the paper, in which case I'd love to give you more things they didn't mention, or you didn't, and I'll give you an overview. So you're covered either way. So they had two facets to it. They discussed a recent clinical trial, which was a washout trial, and they also discussed a meta-analysis. So I'll mention the meta-analysis first. This was done by the University of Medicine in Dublin, Ireland. And a meta-analysis is not a study per se where they're putting things in a test tube or watching people take pills. It's actually done in the mind or on paper. So you're pooling together many studies and saying, okay, of these that were similar, that were valid, what are the themes we can draw that were recurrent, that showed up over and over again? And that's done when there's a large body of data that you want to make sense out of how valid it is. So they went back and looked over all the quality studies on resistant starch. They really started picking up in the 80s, but they've been really going on since and expanding as of recent past. And they put them together and saw what are the clear conclusions we can draw. And what they showed was that resistant starch raises the sense of fullness. When you consume the stuff, your brain is less hungry and you're more satisfied on fewer amounts of calories. They also showed that it can help steady your blood sugar. That's part of why you're not hungry as quickly, but also that's how it can raise energy. Your blood sugar won't drop off, leaving you crashed and frazzled and discombobulated. They also showed that it can lower inflammation. And this is true of the intestinal tract. We'll talk more about that. But this is true in your whole body. So less inflammation all over means that things don't hurt as much. It means you can move more easily. It means that your longevity is greater. You've got lower risk for chronic disease. They also showed that resistant starch cuts the risk of many cancers, which was huge. A brief aside on that, Australia has been fortifying foods with resistant starch as a means to control and lower rates of colorectal cancer. Colorectal cancer is a big deal. Now, some populations are more at risk than others. 3 ones are really relevant. The first one, dear to our audience here, is those with thyroid disease. So the gene that gives someone a risk for thyroid disease also makes a risk for colorectal cancer. So that's an overlap. That's also why I encourage avoiding synthetic folic acid. That's the MTHFR gene. The other big population, those that have a family history of colorectal cancer at any age of life. And the third one, those of us who consume red meat. I do on occasion. I keep it less frequent. But the data is clear that the more of it we consume, the more we are at risk for colorectal cancer. And the researchers argued that the exact mechanism behind all those risks is really negated, really blocked by resistant starch. So exciting, strong proclamations. Now the clinical trial, I said it was a washout trial. That doesn't mean that they were in a washing machine or that they took a power hose to it afterwards. Now it just means that they did an intervention, they saw what it did, and then they stopped and saw how things regressed or how good the benefits lasted, how well the benefits lasted. They looked mostly at gut health, and they had a group of people and they gave them crackers. They gave them crackers that were fortified with resistant starch. And this is a theme. So many of the studies were looking at RS2, the ones in the meta-analysis, and they were looking at quantities that are 20,000 milligrams or more per day. And we always talk about the food sources. How can you do this with foods? The tough part is the quantities used in research, you don't just stumble across in your diet, unfortunately. So we're seeing more and more examples of things fortified with resistant starch to get to those high quantities. And that's what they did in this study. What they saw was that in just 3 weeks, there was a radical shift, a big drop in bad fusiform bacteria, a big increase in Bacteroidetes, protective bacteria, and also a plummet of gut inflammation. So we talked about inflammation being bad in your whole body. Well, your gut's where it's at. So one thing that's been popular, rightfully so, is the significance of your gut and your flora to your overall health. You know, the gut is everything. And in traditional medicine, naturopathic medicine, we've been saying that for centuries, and it's now becoming vindicated. The other popular view, which I think is fading, that's not compatible, is the view that carbs are bad. So your gut is important because these little bugs do nice things for us. But they need carbs. They feed off of carbs. They starve without them, quite literally. And carbs are a big family. Like all families, there's some that are better than others. Probably the worst version would be things like high fructose corn syrup in sodas. But the best version would be resistant starch. And those do nothing other than feed the good bacteria. That's almost all they do in the body. And they make that into good short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. So back to the study, they saw these big drops in gut inflammation. They saw huge positive shifts in the flora. And what happened was in the washout phase, these things did decrease. The benefits did decrease, but they did not go away. And the exciting thing is that these level of changes, they don't happen with probiotics. They don't happen with things that are supplementally added in. They only happen from your own flora improving. You know, it's never a matter of not having good bacteria, it's a matter of how many you've got of what. You know, trace amounts are always there. And if you give them the right nutrients, they grow and they come back. They make a healthy new colony again. And that's what was shown to occur in this study. They also saw better satiety, you know, longer lasting sense of fullness, and several good changes like that. Okay, now a few things they didn't talk about in this paper, which I think are important, is the big picture idea of how this stuff works. So think about digestion as a couple of phases. You're taking big things, making them into small things. You're bringing those small things into your body where you can use them, and you're getting rid of what's left. The first part about big things to small things, that's chewing and that's digesting in the stomach. The next phase we call assimilation. And that one doesn't get the attention it deserves because that's where the rubber meets the road. You know, until you assimilate, nothing happens. You know, you are not what you eat, you are what you assimilate. What you eat may go right out in the toilet. It's only what you assimilate that can help you. Now, the bad part about carbs is that the shady members of the family, like the high fructose corn syrup and the sodas, they absorb too fast. They assimilate quickly, right in the bloodstream, right from the small intestine. That's also true of proteins and fats. They assimilate in the same fashion, but bad carbs do it so fast. And the negative about that is your body works hard to regulate it. So protein, bad carbs, fats, they all require insulin to manage. Then also you make glucagon and cortisol to regulate your blood sugar. And too much of that taxes you. So resistant starch doesn't do any of that. It does not assimilate in the small intestine at all. That's why it's resistant. It hunkers down and holds itself tight and won't get brought in at that stage. Rather, it holds on to what it has and releases its precious cargo, saves it for the good bacteria in the colon. And they use that for fuel. And they grow and they multiply, and they help you in so many ways because of it. The other unique thing is that there is caloric benefit from that, but less than half as much as there is from carbohydrate or protein, and less than quickly 1/20th as much as there would be from fats. So very minimal caloric load. Now the exciting thing is that absorption in the colon is occurring so many hours after your meal that you're not making insulin and your blood sugar's rock solid for 6 to 9 hours. So you get steady blood sugar, you get good food for the flora. They also didn't talk about the types. So we've got RS1 and now through 6. They've actually got RS6. And the numbers have gone up because they've synthesized more versions of that. It's so healthy, there's tons of research, and they're trying to find new versions of it to make. But I've always preferred the ones found in foods. So 1, 2 are found in foods. 1 is there, but it's not helpful for us, so we can forget about it. 2 is the main one that really gives us all the big benefits. That's the one that feeds our flora, helps the blood sugar, gives us the short-chain fatty acids like butyrate, all that stuff. 3 is fine. We make 2 into 3 when foods are cooled, and 3 can work a lot like 2. So the best food sources, potatoes and beans. You get a little bit from things like underripe bananas, you get a little bit from other vegetables, you get some from grains, but honestly, potatoes and beans, past those 2 foods, the quantities become really insignificant. And there's been some recent work looking at how it works from these foods in terms of how it's formed. And a neat trick now is that you can take potatoes, so as always, boil them with water, low temperature cooking, let them go to room temperature, refrigerate them. You've heard that part, probably. So there's a lot of RS in that. But guess what? If you reheat them, now there's even more. And it gets better. If you refrigerate them again and reheat them again, there's even more. So my trick now I love to do, actually the last version of this video I had to scrap because the doorbell rang. The Amazon delivery guy was coming with my potatoes. I just used up the last batch like about 10 minutes ago. I get the organic Yukon Gold yellow potatoes. I cut them in about quarters. I get a big pot of water boiling really hard, add about a tablespoon of salt in the pot. I boil them for roughly 7, 8, 9 minutes, check them with a fork, take them out, let them cool off to room temperature, throw them in the fridge for many hours, take them out, warm them up, and eat them. And I love them, probably like 4 to 6 ounces several times a day. So then I intentionally heat up more than I'm going to eat because I refrigerate the leftovers again. And then I heat them up again and I refrigerate them again. And you keep getting more and more good resistant starch forming by using this strategy. So really, really cool trick. But that's really all about RS2. Now, one more exciting thing you may not have heard is that this also makes melatonin. If you can't sleep well at night, you can take pills. They have an appropriate context. They can be used safely. Their efficacy may not be that large. The melatonin you make is so much more in quantity and so much greater in effect than the melatonin you can ever take. It's more significant. And resistant starch also aids the bacteria to form melatonin. And it's not that you eat the potato and get knocked out. No, it's that you eat the food that has resistant starch or the supplements that have it, and you make more melatonin that's absorbed and stored in your brain. And then it's later on released when you get the proper nighttime cues that it's time to go to sleep. You make a big batch of it, you sleep well, and you wake up feeling great. So one more big perk about that. But so excited, so happy. We're at a time to where information's getting better and better, and we can use that. We can improve the life of ourselves and our loved ones. And it really starts with health. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're suffering, if you're in pain, if you're sluggish, if your intestinal tract hurts, your joints are aching, you cannot lose weight, your hair's thinning, you can't focus on anything else. You can't be altruistic in that point. You can't serve your family or help the causes that are important to you. You're stuck. So all the good things start from health. And once you reset your health, your whole life resets and all the priorities align. So excited to share that with you and excited to be here in this time and see these changes. Dr. Christensen here with you, and take great care. We'll talk in really soon.